Om Sachena Labhistapasa Hyesa Atma Samyagyanena Brahmacharyena Nityam Antaha Sarirehi Jyotirmayo Hi Shubraha Yam Pashanti Yatayaha Kshinadoshaha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The Atman, the indivisible, all-pervasive self in all beings and in all things, is realized by moderation, by knowledge, by austerities, and by veracity. All of these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it everywhere, even here, now, in this very life, mind, and body. Om peace, peace, peace. May that Brahman protect us, and may that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, and with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. We are here on the verge of the 8th class of this subject, which we've entitled Qualification in Sanatana Dharma. At one point, some years ago, we gave a few classes called Qualification is King. And you remember that beautiful chart with Swami Vivekananda sitting on that ornate chair in the West, and with longer hair and this beautiful outfit that he had made, which is sort of a combination of Christian father and Hindu style. And all around him I had these different darshanas listed and what were the key points to them. And I had used, I think, 9 different darshanas or philosophies, paths of clear seeing in that chart. And then some years later now, we find ourselves with this chart that we've been looking at for the last 7 classes, this being the 8th. And next week we'll end the series. We finally definitively decided that that will be the 9th and final class, because that will give us some room to look at Advaita Vedanta, probably much less of a path than it is just a higher truth, just a way of being at the highest level of consciousness. Nonetheless, really deserves looking into. Also take a little glance at Buddhism, possibly. But today we want to finish up that Kundalini yoga that we were looking at last week. I always think of it as something very pleasing to look into. Definitely the most mystic of all darshanas in India, I think. But nonetheless, inviting to look at. So it gives you visualizations like the 7 chakras, centers of consciousness, but with people who are unawakened to higher spiritual truths and have not heard the Dharma, which probably wouldn't include very many people who are looking in on this class series. They might mistake such associations as chakras being inside of you to be in the body, when last week we were pretty much clarifying that these are in the inner realms. What do you call them? The kingdoms of heaven within would be the only reference we have in this Western Christian-based country. The kingdoms of heaven within. Or sometimes Jesus referred to them as, my Father's house has many mansions, or my Father's mansion has many rooms. So he's definitely not speaking about the body, because the rooms in the body are probably not anything you'd want to visit, maybe except with a scalpel or with a microscope. But it's definitely nothing heavenly in there in the body. And if you want to find anything that's more heavenly in the body, it's outside with the face and with the flesh and with the affectations and so forth. And people's health, pure health, the light that shines off the body of a Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, for instance. They said that he was a man of very tender body and lots of light coming off him. We hear that's the same in the case with both Jesus and Lord Buddha 500 years before Jesus. So the point here being that these chakras, these 7 vortexes of spiritual energy, are not in the physical body, they're not in the physical world. You might say they intersect them or flow through them, but when they do so, they turn into physical energy, like prana, and kinetic and electric energy is an offshoot of that. Vibration of particles is a part of that, atomic, subatomic, and so forth. And I actually want to show you something today about that when we look at Yoga Vasishta's beautiful system. Very ancient in India, maybe not quite as ancient as Lord Copula's, but it's hard to tell historically. So these chakras, then, we were talking about them, and it's very important to know that these are centers that you would visit within consciousness, not within the body. So I made up a saying about that some year or so ago, was that when you're looking for God or Brahman or Buddha nature or Allah or whatever it's called by different traditions, you don't look backwards. That means in history. You don't look forward. That means projecting into the future. You don't look upward, because that's just up into physical space. You look inside. And then we had to further qualify that, speaking of qualification, by saying you don't look inside the body, you look inside consciousness. And the mind is the best carrier of consciousness. It's actually a quote right out of the Rig Veda, actually. Carrier, you are the carrier of consciousness. You are the devourer of death. You are the eternal companion of all beings. This is consciousness we're talking about, our own consciousness. And it's non-dual in its essence. It carries dualities. It reflects them. But that's only in people who haven't seen or had the experience of samadhi, satori, nirvikalpa, asampragyata, and what Buddha called it, pragyaparam. Yes, he believed in God. You don't want to use the word belief or God there, but yes, he called it pragyaparam, this supreme consciousness, this living intelligence, buddhi, or awakened buddhi, or Buddha, Bharata. So in that sense, then, we want to look at Lord Vasishta's system today for the bulk of the time, but I promised last week that to put an exclamation point upon Kundalini Yoga, we would look at Sri Ramakrishna's sayings on the 6 chakras. Probably the most alluring and interesting tattva, if you want to call it that, in Kundalini Yoga is the chakras. I was talking about, before we started class here with the people here, is that in the 60s and 70s, when Kundalini Yoga became known to us, then young people then, were very enamored of the system, and the thing that they were most enamored of would be that mention of lotuses. And you can allocate them to the different levels of the body, just as a sort of chart, like I'm using here. It's a measuring device. It's a map. The human body is a map, and so there are, as Sri Ramakrishna said, the eyes are in the center of the forehead, but they're always looking down to the organs of sex and voiding. So he said most people's consciousness, the hint you have, you look in the mirror, is that your eyes carry most of the spirituality, your gaze. And that would certainly be true of these illumined souls. When they look at you, you'll feel a transformation coming from them. And the fire intelligence will be burning through them and penetrating through your resistances and your limitations and your problems. And that was true of all these great souls we hear about in the religions. So that means these higher centers are nicely situated in the body to tell you what's higher, what's moderate, what's medium, and what's lower. So if the tension gets put on just food and making a living, sex life, those kinds of things, and that's all, there's no awakening of these higher centers then in you, in people that focus there. So Sri Ramakrishna leaves no room for doubt when we say that when he described the 7 lotuses as he visited them in his own sadhana, his own experience, as if he had to come into the body to open these pathways, these nadis I was talking about last week, so that people would know that these exist. Now, there was a time when people, even in India, a time of maybe an earlier Kali Yuga or a time of darkness, where they had lost track of the heart center and the throat center and the third eye center. So people were living, even in India, evidently at these 3 lower centers only. The ancestors is at the third center, basically, to correlate them. And so that's a lower heaven, you might say. It's not a real gross place, but it's a place where vibration is still based upon fame and name and making money and lands and wealth and that attraction to things physical. And heaven, attraction to heaven, is also a thing that India got over after a while. They got over the heaven-aspiring senses, says the Upanishad. And so there was a time when they lost track of these higher centers until the Upanishads tell us Mahachamasya, this great rishi, was meditating one day and his heart chakra opened. He was thinking there must be something beyond the ancestors, as it were, beyond that level of lower heaven. It's got a light, but it can't be the highest. Sort of like what Buddha did 2,500 years ago when he went to the Bo tree. There has to be more than this. What Christ said when he went into the wilderness after he saw the Romans and the Jews and all this fighting and all this war going on, there's got to be something higher than this. And he came out of the wilderness and say, I am the light of the world. That he found it, you see. So that light is this light that comes from the highest center, the Sahasrara chakra, 1,000-petaled up there. And I'm motioning to my head just to correlate that's indicating, it's an indication of a very high center where name and form and passions and fetters and limitations, lower heavens, the wars between the gods and the asuras and all of this have fallen away, and consciousness has lifted itself up and out of the earth and all the heavy afflictions that are there, on all the limitations that are there. So I'm giving that as a premise to the fact that we're going to read right down the row here what Sri Ramakrishna said in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna about these 7 chakras. You see it here. First, yes, we've already done it on this chart. So let's go right to Sri Ramakrishna's words on this chart, which I've put together, about Sri Ramakrishna's own experiences of Kundalini Yoga. Now, starting here at the bottom, let's save the quotes for emphasis when we end this chart. So there you see the 7 chakras. Number 1's on the lower left, 2 is lower right, 3 is middle left, 4 is middle right. As you move up these chakras, you'll see that I've placed here certain information about them and quotes by the great master Sri Ramakrishna about each of these chakras that he found were the essence in them. So the Muladhara chakra, it's allocated to the base of the spine. It's where Kundalini sleeps, like a coiled up serpent. And it's a coil, so you have to release this coil. So great teachers of Kundalini would ask you, have you released the coil yet? And if you didn't know anything about the system yet, you'd ask, what do you mean, sir? So this has to be the important chakra of awakening to higher things. I could say maybe all of us in the West, when we were born with parents and so forth, we were totally oblivious to anything like that being even possible. And then we met a spiritual teacher, and then, have you awakened your coil yet? Have you raised your consciousness beyond lower considerations? Is your mind hearing the sound of Om, emanating from your heart and your third chakra? And so all of a sudden you become aware, and to become aware of a thing is to actually have it occur to you. So if you haven't heard of it, it won't occur to you. But as soon as you hear about it, then this awakening, this raising of Mother Kundalini from the lowest center is already beginning to happen. And she's already prepared the way. It's a great nadi. In fact, it's 3 nadis, the Sushumna, the Ida, and the Pingala. This is the main freeway, like a main concourse, where when Kundalini opens, she will move up, as it were. This is actually in, of course, into these lotuses. So think about it as stretched inward towards a point of light that you can see, which is here. And so the soul awakens to that, and it moves out of this lower chakra, and it goes towards the chakra at the organs of sexuality and procreation. And then it can pierce through that, and it can see a better light, and it goes toward these lower heavens of the ancestors there at where rebirth is taking place, at the Manipura chakra. So I'm pointing to my body, but this is a visualization you're having, that you're opening these nadis that have been closed for some time, maybe since your last lifetime, or maybe since you passed through the curtain of nescience at death and rebirth. Because what passed was never born and never dies. That's what we'll talk about next week with Advaita. But basically, the transmigrating soul it can visualize then these centers inward towards these much higher refined areas of consciousness, where great thoughts come from, and great systems like we're studying come from. Great minds live there. Minds greater than the ancestors, greater than the gods live there. They keep subtle bodies there. That's why we have gross body, subtle body, and causal body, teachings about that. And that's why we have the 3 worlds, and that's why we have the 7 chakras or lotuses, so that we know that these are existing, not back, not forward, not up, and not in the body. Check that off your list. I'm not thinking of it that way. I'll give you a list later or send it to you. You can just make a check. No, I will not think of consciousness as being in any of those places. It's within, along this trajectory of a 3-fold river of pilgrimage that you're going to swim in. The soul's going to get out and uncoil and swim in this river of bliss. And the bliss is going to get more and more intense as it goes inward and inward, as consciousness lets loose of things that are heavyweights on it. Lust, anger, greed, jealousy, fear, pride, caste, pride of lineage, shame, grief, you name it. These things are weights on that intended freedom that Divine Mother Kundalini wants you to have as you move inside. So this is a visualization I'm giving you to kind of match what Sri Ramakrishna is about to say about it. He says, Mother, in every living creature, thou dost have thy dwelling place. As Kundalini, thou dost live in the lotus of the Muladhara. So she's there waiting for your attention so she can give you her full attention. People who ignore her or don't hear about her, then she will rest and sleep there at the base of the spine. That's called unawakened people, it's called ignorant beings, it's called worldly people, and people who have no idea or interest in divine things. Those people will remain unaware of her presence. And she's a great secret. She is the greatest secret of this system, Kundalini Yoga. And well, maybe we'll get to that quote, but Sri Krishna said spiritual awakening will not happen unless she comes up. She's awakened at the base of the spine. So that's how important this Muladhara chakra is. They call it yellow in color, square, with 4 petals. The seed word is Lam. The deity is Brahma, the first god of the Trinity, the projector, the god who projects everything. And the Shakti there is called Dakini. It's also a word shared in Tibetan Buddhism, this great aspect of Divine Mother, Shakti. Now that we've started into this, I'm going to go through it quickly now that I've given you a sort of visualization, but move with me inward as if you're seeing this with a third eye. You're seeing this open concourse towards this great ocean of light, and it just seems very attracting to you, and you want to dive into it. So you're going to start with a stream, and then you're going to dive into a river, and that river is going to take you to an ocean. And you're the swimmer. And this is a river of Amrit, of nectar, that's becoming more and more sweet and more ecstatic and more intensified and refined as you move to the higher centers. Then there's this, at the organs of procreation, location in the body, that is, although it's not in the body, it's just allocated or correlated with that. There you can see the second chakra, Svetasvataropanisad chakra. He says about it, above it, he means above the Muladhara, lies the Svetasvata, where the 4-petaled lotus blooms. There also thou dost make thy home, O mystic power of Kundalini, in the 4 petals of that flower, and in Vajrasrana's 6 petals. So that's what it says here. Symbol is the crescent moon, whereas before a yellow square symbolized the Muladhara. But in the Svetasvataropanisad, the crescent moon symbolizes that. It has 6 orange petals. The seed is Vam. And then the deity is Vishnu. And Rakini is his Shakti there. So this is why this is a beautiful system, right? It's putting together symbols and images with deities, Brahma and Dakini, in that first case, Vishnu and Rakini, and color-coded, if you want to put it that way, with words of power, bijams, lam, and vam in these cases. And there in the middle you can see the Divine Mother herself worshiping the Shiva lingam, and Ganesha making it all auspicious. The Om sign is there, and the words there in English are, you start with the worship. It takes you to knowledge of what you're worshiping. You long for oneness with what you're worshiping, and then you awaken. So that's this inward trajectory put in terms of English words. Worship, knowledge, longing, and awakening into the spirit. Going on to the 3rd chakra, which is there at the stomach, you see. It's called Manipura chakra, and if you were to envision it along the river of this Sushumna, that's the central channel, you can see it's just peopled with so many beings and so many routes. Like if you were to look at a great city from the air and watching all these roads, from a helicopter, watching all these roads and cars and various vehicles flowing into it through different avenues, inwardly that's what you would see, all lit up, with the light of consciousness. This is 3rd chakra. So much traffic as concourse going on there. And the symbol of that is a triangle, as you can see there. It makes a very beautiful image. And a yantra, they call that. And then the petals are 10, and they're yellow in color, they say, a yellowish hue. The seed is Ram, the deity is Rudra, his Shakti is Lakini. So now we have Lam, Vam, Ram. So you can see these words are words of power that correlate with each of these 3 centers. And now we've just looked in a very miniaturized way at the three lower worlds. You might call it Earth, nether realms, or Earth, low, and the lower heavens. Not many words for that second chakra, but elemental worlds, and where sets of beings between the earth plane and the ancestors make their dwelling place. So all the three of these worlds are going to be pierced through. And Sri Ramakrishna is talking about, at the navel is the Manipura, the blue 10-petaled lotus flower. Through the pathway of the Sushumna, thou dost ascend and enter there, O Lady of the lotuses. In lotus blossoms thou dost dwell. So we talked about Mahachamasya coming to this fourth in his meditation, opening up a channel by removing a blockage called a Granthi, removing a blockage and going through what we talked about last week as being the Vishnu Granthi, moving into the heart chakra. There's the Anahata chakra symbol is a circle, 12 green petals on it, and different worlds, you might say, these petals. And the seed is Yam. So now we have Lam, Vam, Ram, Yam as the words that call forth the ideal or the image, the vision of these chakras. The deity there is Ishama Rudra, and the Shakti he has there is Kakini. 5 is in the middle there at the throat. And for that, he says, above in the throat is the 16-petaled lotus of smoky hue. There lies concealed a subtle space, transcending which one perceives the universe and space dissolve. So the three worlds are in different kinds of space. We'll look at that in a minute when we look at Lord Rishisha's system of the 5 different kinds of space called akashas. That's why this segues very nicely into Yoga Vasishta's scripture and philosophy. But you can see there, in the case of the Vishuddha chakra, is I'm sorry, I skipped over chakra 4. So please go back with me to the right-hand side of the chart and look at the Anahata chakra. We have to get to that first, of course. Heart chakra has to open before the Vishuddha chakra can open. So I started to rush ahead to the Vishuddha chakra. So back to the Anahata chakra, there's a symbol, which I did say, circle with 12 green petals. Word is Yam. The deity is Ishama Rudra and Kakini. Yes, that was covered. In the middle then is this 5th chakra called Vishuddha chakra. That's at the throat as far as the bodily location goes. The symbol is a silver crescent. The petals are 16, bluish hue in color. The seed is Hum. The deity is Panchavakra Shiva, and the Shakti is Shakini herself. And I read the quote about it. In the 16-petal lotus of smoky hue, there lies concealed a subtle space. So it's a very subtle space that you're talking about there. And it transcends space and time and name and form. So that's number 5, right in the middle there, what I've just shown you about it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chakras of the 7. Now we come to the right-hand side of the chart on the upper corner, and we see the 6th chakra there, Agya. That's at the third eye, what they call it affectionately, the third eye center. And he says, higher yet between the eyebrows blossoms the lotus of 2 petals, where the mind of man remains a prisoner and past controlling. From this flower, one desires to watch the sportive play of life. Said by an expert, because that was what Sri Ramakrishna was very good at doing, is witnessing or watching the sport of Kundalini Shakti as she expressed herself through all these worlds, not just on the physical level, which many people are enamored of, but watching Divine Mother swing. One song in India says how she swings through these lotuses like a bird flitting from branch to branch, she used to say, or from a fish darting through the shallows, or a monkey swinging from limb to limb. This is how Sri Ramakrishna described watching the sport, lightning-like sport of Mother Kundalini, what he liked to refer to also as Mother Kali, moving in mercurial fashion between these centers. That Agya chakra is a triangle, is the symbol of it, and its petals are two. It's violet in hue, and there the seed is Om. The deity is Shiva and Shakti conjoined, and the Shakti is called Hakini. Then moving on to the seventh chakra, which sometimes they don't call a center at all, because it's of course even beyond that very single Jnana Chakshu, that single third eye, which is already, we saw back at the Vishuddha chakra that the universe of space and time begins to dissolve to the witness, and they see all these other chakras disappear, as it were, and it's like going up a mountain and not being able to, so high on a mountain that you can't see the plains anymore below. You're even above the clouds, as it were, as a sort of physical symbol. So you're having this very intense experience of formlessness at that center of the Vishuddha, and then up to the Agya, where it's just even wisdom. They say the wisdom, higher wisdom that you've cherished so long, begins to dissolve there and into yourself. The wisdom, the knower of wisdom, and the act of gaining wisdom all melds into one thing. And so what to say about the Sahasrara chakra? He says, highest of all within the head, the soul enthralling center is where shines the 1,000-petaled lotus, Mahadeva's dwelling place. Having ascended to this throne, O spouse of Shiva, sit beside him. So that's why we said Shiva and Shakti were conjoined at the third eye, and now they are one at the seventh chakra. So that we are clear about chakras in this great system, that we are qualifying ourselves in Sanatana Dharma, right, over these classes. So when we looked at Kundalini, we've learned something more about the chakras, that they're located within, and that they transcend the lower worlds and the world of the ancestors, and that they have certain deities assigned to them, and they have certain words that call them into being, that one can recite in mantras. So to put a capper on that, the quote here says, whirlpools of dynamic energy which congeal the potent spiritual awareness of Kundalini Shakti, the chakras permeate the etheric, subtle, and causal bodies of mankind, which are made up of unmanifested Prakriti. So then one is moving beyond physical nature, and one is also moving beyond that level of mind wherein the seeds lie to produce physical nature. That's called unmanifested Prakriti. That's more thoughts. Like you think a world and then it happens. You say a word and then the meaning comes with it. So thoughts and words, and the power that's associated with them is this Kundalini Shakti that is lightning-like in her movements. Hard to detect, they say, by even the greatest yogis. The final, since we've worked our way nicely from the bottom of the chart upward, touching these lotuses with our tongue, the tongue of our mind, because that's how Sri Ramakrishna described his experience inside when he actually saw them. He said, some of those flowers were drooping, but when I touched them with my tongue, I came close, they blossomed forth. So that's the awakening of consciousness that's been sleeping or unaware of higher levels of itself for some time. You come close to it with the tongue of knowledge, as it were, and all of a sudden it says, oh, there you are, and it opens up for you, and it opens this channel to higher levels of consciousness. This is a somewhat of a description of how illumined souls return to the source. Because when people who are bound to the lower three worlds, they'll go to the ancestors, they'll be born again with the ancestors, and this is called the Kala Chakra by Buddha, or Maya in Indian darshanas. This is the wheel of transmigration. But for souls who are penetrating the heart chakra and moving inwards to these other two chakras, Vishuddha and Agya, they're about to exit out of those chakras. So it's very important for them then to identify fully with Kundalini Shakti as she moves them to these higher centers. The final quote there is, "Thou art the primal power, O Mother, she whose senses are controlled. The yogis meditate on thee as Uma, great Himalaya's daughter. Thou who art the power of Shiva, put to death my ceaseless cravings. Grant that I never fall again into the ocean of this world, Mother. Thou art the primal power, thou the five cosmic principles. Who can ever hope to know thee, who art beyond all principles? Only for thy bhakta's sake dost thou assume thy various forms. But when the devotee's five senses merge in the five subtle elements, Mother, it is thyself alone that he beholds as formless truth." So a lot in that one quote there. So you would probably immediately say, if you were remaining constant with these last 7 classes, we studied all the darshanas and the tattvas, right? So here they are. If you hadn't studied in the Kapila system, for instance, and qualified yourself in it, then you'd be going, what is that again? What are these tattvas? And where are they listed? And how do I know them? And why are they so important? Because the Divine Mother herself is using them, and consciousness is moving through them, both inward and outward, involution and evolution. And in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, consciousness is moving through them. And through outer nature, unmanifested nature, and into the intelligence of the transmigrating soul and beyond, the consciousness is moving all of this. That's Kundalini Shakti, rather in a nutshell, but still by a great master of a Kundalini system when we look at what we've been studying last week as chakras in Kundalini Yoga. So that's why it appealed to us so much back in the 60s and 70s when some of the teachers began to bring it our way from India. And we've learned a lot about it since. We've all heard of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and there's a lot more that he says about Kundalini Shakti in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. So that's a good go-to place now in your second or third reading of it, because I assume you've already read it once. Maybe go through it with an eye to catch all the things he says about Kundalini Shakti and note them down or mark them so that, because he says so much in the Gospel about Samkhya and about Tantra and about different darshanas that we're trying to qualify ourselves with here. And they sing about Kundalini Shakti too very nicely. Sarvajnana Shakti Mahakundalini Jivatma Paramatma Dharini Shri Devi Rudrani Kalaratri Devi Vijaya Vijaya Devi Maheshini Shri Yoga Mai Chit Shakti Devi Jaya Vijaya Devi Vasundari Shri Mantra Shakti Mata Deva Devi Tasa Tattva Devi Shakti Darshini Shri Devi Padam Shri Devi Padam Shri Devi Padam Shri Devi Padam. And many other verses like that one. I just chose those four because they mentioned the Maha Kundalini in them. So are we moving higher into Advaita, or are we coming down from the Kundalini system to talk about things that are maybe not quite so mystic and intense when we move to the great teachings of Lord Vashishta? But let's do that now so that we can fulfill the at least 8 or 9 of these darshanas, these paths of clear seeing, in this class series called Qualification in the Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma, beautiful phrase, eternal religion. Sri Ramakrishna called it the eternal religion of the ancient rishis. They were truth knowers in a very early time. So you can't really look at history over one lifetime or the birth of the United States, a nation, with its books on lower knowledge and so forth, and then measure everything by that as if we've been advancing all this time. Actually, we've been declining, according to India. As the ages go by, this precious truth that belongs to Kundalini Shakti gets veiled and veiled and veiled. More veils fall in front of it, till pretty soon beings are thinking that the physical world is all there is. Systems like Kundalini Shakti system, Kundalini Yoga, systems that talk about the eternal divine knowledge, like Samkhya Yoga, they are forgotten and underemphasized, and maybe just called, obsolete. I've actually heard young people nowadays call them obsolete. I don't want to learn that old knowledge anymore. But this is the eternal divine knowledge that was first introduced back in the land of Bharat and by the rishis who were truth seekers, who then gave us these 108 Upanishads, which then became known as Vedanta. So I'm speaking this way because one of the first things I say here is that as we go back to our original chart, that we've moved through almost completely. We have all these arms of Durga Devi there, the 10 arms, and they each have an assignment, and we've moved through all of those with the bullet points. Now we come here to Vashishta's Yoga, and one of the first things he says then is what I'm just talking about, that this Vashishta's Yoga preserves some of the earliest teachings on crucial systems like the 5 Akashas. I want to show you a little bit about that in a minute to fill out the class. So if it wasn't for great beings like Vashishta coming along and talking about 5 different kinds of space, then as I was just saying, now we're thinking only in terms of one space, physical space, Bhutakasha they would call that in that system. But they know that Bhutakasha merged into the Pranakasha, subtle energy, life force, and that those two merged into the Jnanakasha and Chittakasha, Manakasha, Jnanakasha, Chittakasha, that there are 5 different kinds of space. But if your attention and focus, even your obsession, is with outer space only, then you're not going to be able to understand that consciousness, when it becomes so diminished and so refined, and the vibration becomes less and less in it, that it turns smaller and smaller and disappears. That's why heaven can't be seen. And so you have to kind of have some sort of belief or faith in it, that it's somewhere. So people look up, and of course they're all misguided by that. It's inside. The kingdoms of heaven are within. So in that way, we're talking about Lord Vashishta as being responsible for holding, like Vedavyas was later with Vedanta, because he had many incarnations, that Lord Vashishta was one of those mind-born sons of Lord Brahma, whom we saw here at the base as the deity of the base of the Muladhara Chakra. He's one of the holders of that original divine knowledge. And otherwise it could have very easily been lost, as probably a lot of other systems of knowledge and particles of knowledge, that is, cross-sections of wisdom, probably lost, like in the case of when Mahachamasya discovered the heart chakra. Everything that was there was lost when we started concentrating on the 3 lower worlds only. So all we believed in there was earth and heaven, and then hell somehow got in there, which, doesn't exist as a location. So, I'm editing an article the other day, the very first words said, hell does not exist. You don't have to worry about that after death. This is a Tibetan Buddhist writer. So basically, we begin to believe only in one world, but some of us who still had some inkling that there was such a thing as religion, and began to keep hold of heaven. You see, the heaven-aspiring senses wanted to go there, but they didn't know that they would have to come back to earth after their exhaustion of their good merits. So they'd be pulled back into the body on earth. This all became known to us by the advent of great teachers like Shisharda Devi and Swami Vivekananda. So these great teachings, like the 5 Akashas, which I'll show you in a minute, were preserved by him. The Vashishta system holds particular details on the processes of the formation of karmas and samskaras. And those got emphasized later by Sri Ram and Sri Krishna. And this is a good place to pause for a second and say, on 1st of next month, we're having a seminar called From Ram to Krishna to Sri Ramakrishna. And so if you have not reserved your space for that seminar, I would advise it, because that's what's meant here, basically, is that great systems like this have preserved certain details about karma, how it gets formed, how it can be neutralized, how it can be alleviated completely, how it can be transcended, and then how never to form it in the first place. That's what you'll find when Lord Vashishta is teaching Sri Ram. So again, the seminar next week, From Ram to Krishna to Sri Ramakrishna, not next week, in 2 weeks. Look for that to come up, and we'll look into this very point deeper. The third point here is represents Vedanta prior to its own mature development via Vedavyas in later millennia. So that's what I was talking about here. Let's see. So we have looked back to Vashishta, very ancient. We know that he was one of the 10 mind-born sons of Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma is the projector, the creator, as it were, projector of all these worlds that we just looked at, the 7 chakras, the 5 akashas, as I was just talking about, and all the beings in them. So if he's one of the 10 mind-born sons of Lord Brahma, then you can see that it would fall to him to hold on to this great knowledge for a long time, through ages even, which is proven by the fact that we have a scripture called Vashishta's Yoga. And we've even put out a version of it ourselves in SRV that you can read and study. The fourth point here, that Vashishta's Yoga follows the time-tested tradition of utilizing stories to communicate spiritual teachings. And that's called itihasa. You know, you've got the Shruti and you've got the Smriti and you've got, you know, different names for different levels of scripture and teachings. You also have what's called the itihasa, which is this historical scriptural history that uses stories to communicate these truths to people. Otherwise, they could be forgotten. We know, for instance, that Swami Vivekananda's mother was reading to him these stories when he was growing up as a young boy right there in Calcutta, near to Sri Ramakrishna, before he even met Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna was over at the Kali temple, and Vivekananda went to him later when he was in his teens. In the meantime, his mother's reading him these stories out of the Itihasa, and so he grew up with them. And many of the children in India do get those teachings. At least they used to. I hope it's still going on to a great extent. So then, looking at Vashishta's Yoga, I just put 4 bullet points. There was a lot more I could put there. But let's move on then to these 5 Akashas. We can have a glance at them in this class. And say goodbye to that chart for now. Unfortunately, not in Footfalls, but it will come up again in other classes, series, and seminars and retreats that we undertake. Here you see the 5 Akashas put in terms of 5 Russian dolls. You could also put them as Japanese dolls. I couldn't find out the origin of who figured out how to put a doll inside of another doll and did it 5 times. Japan claims it, Russia claims it. There are other nations probably that do too, but basically it's a very good way, and maybe even the more important way of entertaining your child, or just merely entertaining your child, but actually giving a great teaching on this ancient divine wisdom, is that like 5 little Russian dolls, each of these spaces are included inside of each other. And there's this great space of consciousness. The Mahakasha actually was a word that Sri Ramakrishna gave to it in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And he said, the soul, like a bird, when it's free, loves to soar into that Mahakasha, that great space of consciousness. So if it soars high enough, as it were, here we're using inadequate terms like higher and lower and inner and outer, but if it soars deep enough, swims deep enough in that ocean of consciousness, then it will be like a goldfish released from a bowl, finally, after so long, and it'll feel that kind of freedom. But it can also come back down and light on the branch of a tree to rest. So this is how Sri Ramakrishna talks symbolically of the Akashas, that the soul could soar into them, deep into them, and then it might want to come back down. So in his case, he said he would only come down so far as the heart chakra. What we just looked at over here is the Anahata chakra, right? With its petals and its worlds and its colors and its names and its beings. So he would come down to that as if it were the drawing room or library of a rich man, he said, as there he could communicate with beings above and below, again, inadequate terms, within and externally. And then, so he could stand at the brink of these worlds where people are attached to heaven and tell them, come deeper, dive deeper, go forward, open up the heart chakra. And who's to tell that that wasn't the exact voice that Mahachamasma heard when he finally did penetrate through the Rudra Granthi, the Vishnu Granthi, and get into the heart chakra in that age and open up that avenue for more people to do so. So they wouldn't be just restricted to the Kala chakra, Buddha called it, this transmigrating soul going from heaven to earth to hell. Well, all of those are included in these 5 spaces. I think 5 spaces or 5 akashas is a better system than the 3 world system. The 3 world system puts it a little simpler for people, but this really adds in a lot of the filler to the soul's journey in these chakras. That's why I'm saying is that the Kundalini system hooks up very well and coalesces very well with Lord Vashishtha's teachings in that ancient. So you could probably say for certain that they were very aware of Divine Mother's movement, a lot of those seers dedicated to her throughout lifetimes. So the Russian dolls here then become a beautiful way of expressing something that otherwise could be a little bit too esoteric for people. The quote there is, like 5 Russian dolls of diminishing size, neatly nesting inside of one another, all ending up in one all-inclusive unit. Similarly, do the 5 atmospheres through which name and form manifest all reside within each other, from causeless to causal to subtle to gross, each holding multiple dimensions, countless worlds, and myriad beings. Back to the chakras again. It would be good to have qualified yourself in the system of the chakras before you heard Vashishtha speak like this. And then you know that he's talking about three worlds at times. He's talking about 7 chakras at other times, and he's talking about 5 atmospheres at another time. And so these are great systems that you qualify yourself in. Not just one of them, I would say, although some people are satisfied with take just one. But again, the 3 worlds isn't going to tell you very much about the 4 upper chakras, or about the 4 other atmospheres, or 3 other atmospheres that are within you. Space is just seen as physical space and outer space. Inner space remains rather unexplored by the people of this day and time, as if we were in the condition that Mahachamasya was in when he penetrated through and opened up his heart chakra. That's what we'll do here as we follow this chart quickly. There you see the little Russian doll in the bottom right-hand side of the chart. And you could say there, the Bhutakasha is the space of objects. What objects? Anything from human bodies, animals, insects, plants, microorganisms, planets, ether, air, fire, water, earth, objects, atoms, molecules, subatomic particles, and so forth. All of these fall, and more, fall in the Bhuta Kasha. It's the space of physical things, physical objects, grosser physical vibration. And also can be called the Burloka. You know, that famous mantra that we chant, Om Bur Bhuva Swaha. When you say Bur, you're really talking about this Bhutakasha level of gross space, densely vibrating space. You can see the path of the ancestors then takes you towards the Pranakasha. Call that the space of life force. So you use it tonight when you go from waking to dream. You're on this pathway. It takes your consciousness into subtler dimension. Most people don't remember their dreams or how they got there or how they got back to waking. But if you use a mantra and so forth, you begin to trace that pattern of how you wake, dream, go into deep sleep, come back to dream, go back to waking. And then maybe we can talk about that next week when we look at the Advaita Vedanta, because that's one of Gaudapada's systems in Indian wisdom that he accented. That is Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti, the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state, simulates, as it were, in a very good way, probably the best way of all, how a soul moves inward through chakras, through realms or worlds, or through lokas, or through akashas, take your pick. So if it moves inward to the Pranakasha, then there you see beings like Indra, gods, goddesses, demigods, mains, asuras, munis, siddhis, Gandharvas, angels, ancestors, nagas, elementals, lost spirits, and pretas, also caught in the cracks there sometimes. And so that's a cross-section of Sanskrit and English words, and maybe even some more Greek and Roman kind of references to kind of cover it all, basically to say that this second chakra is where a lot of these beings keep subtle bodies. That's often referred to as the Bhuvar Loka. And Krishna has talked about it as the path of the moon in the Gita, that by their good karma, they come into this heaven, and then when they exhaust, the merits are exhausted, they return to the Burloka again, or to the Bhutakasha. So consciousness is taking on, giving up, dreaming its movement, its journey through these different levels of space. So we have to start thinking like this, that there's inner space. It should be obvious to most of us, but then maybe even when it's obvious to some of us, it's not explored very often, or it's not even believed in. It's not included in your study of life. It's not in schools, certainly. You'd have to go to gurus and teachers and so forth to learn about it, like Swami Vivekananda and others in Calcutta did with Sri Ramakrishna back then, as he was on the scene rich with all this experience of these teachings. Again, the Sanatana Dharma, these ancient rishis like Vashishta, holding this for ages, so that even now in the Kali Yuga, in this year 2023, which we assign to it, we have access to these great teachings. Having fallen so far away from them in time and in proximity, they appear new to us. But this is the ancient wisdom, the way that a well-rounded soul and a balanced mind would think about existence. That the real existence is within. The kings of heaven are within. And I'm out here on a sojourn right now. You see, birds have nests, foxes have holes. I don't really have a place out here. I'm just on a sojourn as into this mansion of different rooms. So this happens to be the outer room. So some of these souls will then, even while they're here, beat a hasty retreat, make sure these pathways inward are open to them. And these are called luminaries or seers, or in the ancient times called rishis, called yogis even nowadays, so forth. They know about these, and they keep these pathways open and fresh. You walk through a jungle, then the branches come and hit you in the back as you move through. See, you look back, and the path you just came through is completely clogged. You don't know where you came from. That's the predicament of people in the physical world, this physical Burloka, or what we're calling Bhutakasha, that they don't know where they came from because they didn't keep the path. They didn't keep eyes in the back of their head. Spirituality could be called eyes in the back of your head, so that you know where you came from, and then you know where you're going. And eventually, as next week we'll look at, you know that you don't come and go at all. That coming and going is all happening in the dream in your mind, but your Atman is stationary. It becomes manifold, but it's stationary. Onwards to the path of the celestials. You see, you take a long journey inwards there to the Chittakasha, the space of thought. Realm of the sages, mind-born sons. It's called Maharloka or Janaloka in that system of 7 worlds. But here we call it, and the Svarloka is what you move through to get to it. So basically, that's Chittakasha. So what does it tell you right away? Is that all space comes from thought. The worlds come from thought. When the great Lord Brahma thinks in a very deep way at the beginning of a cosmic cycle, then he thinks with the use of the Upanishads and the great wisdom that's in him. And he passes that on to Vashishta, one of his mind-born sons, and Vashishta then takes care of the worlds that Brahma projects. And that wisdom gets to us then, down this corridor of time, moving from inward out, to let us know that there is a path that leads back inward, and that's where your destination was not here. Birds and foxes, they come from nature, but you don't come from nature. Nature comes from you. So you give it up. You let go of the 5 elements. Didn't we just read that back here in this Kundalini chart, you see? That, oh mother, you take the 5 elements and you give them to people, and then you take it away from them so they don't become attached to the physical world only, and they begin to move inside, to know that there's subtle senses. That's what we just read. From the gross senses, you go to the subtle senses. From the gross elements, you go to the subtle elements. Those are sets of 5s, and 2 of those 5s are back inside of you. They're not out here. The physical version of them is out here, but their origin is back inside of you, like any good origin would be. Chitakasha, then, that's that 3rd Russian doll. So, sometimes we like to pull this out once in a while. I usually make a mess of things when I do that. But there's another one inside. So this is going to be the one we're about to look at, the Gyanakasha. Inside the Gyanakasha is the Chitakasha, which we just looked at. Inside the Chitakasha, there's the Pranakasha, you see. And then you've got the Bhutakasha inside that. Yes, it is there. Ta-da! So, fun games to play with your children, but I think parents are missing the most important part of it. If they don't tell them that these are 5 kinds of space inside of you, because that's what originally gave rise to such a toy like this. It should be a toy for spiritual education. And then you'll very simply be able to describe to them, if they ask, well, where is heaven, mommy, or something, you say, well, let me show you this. There's not more than heaven, and it's all back inside of you. Jesus told us that. So, you can come from any tradition, and you can have a good, plausible way of explaining inner space. It's just that in terms of Lord Vashishta, he mastered it by his meditations, and then he moved to it. So he was a physical person at one time here in the Bhutakasha, in the physical space, just like we are. So was Sri Ramakrishna, the great avatar of this age, a physical person in the 1800s, in this Akasha. But these are beings who know where they came from because of systems like this. That's why we qualify ourselves in them. Because it will get rid of the fear of death first, then it will get rid of the belief in death. Fear of death is one thing, but the fact that it doesn't even exist in the first place made your fear unfounded in the first place. So you become immortal. The Upanishads, it's not the best word to use, kind of Roman and Greek in origin, but you become the eternal being that's free from birth and death completely. I could sing it to you. We've done it so many times. Namrityur nashanka name jati beta. I have no death. Why? Because I was never born. So if your child asks you about, heaven, or asks you about what's within, then asks you what happened to great granddad and grandfather died the other day, and you can see, no, he didn't die because he was never born. And right away, you're treating your child to the highest wisdom ever in a simple way. It's called non-duality. It's because you have no separation from God ever. Hell doesn't exist. Heaven doesn't even exist if it's not inside your own thinking. See? That's why thought, Chitakasha, gives rise to all of this. And where does thought get its power? From wisdom. The Gyanakasha is next. There you can see beings, they call that the path of the luminaries. They keep their subtle bodies there. Who? Seers, rishis, paramahamsas, mahatmas, avadutas, sages, arhats, yogis, manus. Manus are those mind-born sons and so forth. The rishis there are 7 of those. Paramahamsas, we know Sri Ramakrishna to be one of those. Mahatmas, Gandhi was named that. And so forth. Arhats, that's one of the names of the Buddha. And the people who came after, those great souls that came after the Buddha were called Arhats, his great realized students. So this all has to do with space, right? So if we wanted to just refer to space again, musically, the way these seers that I'm just naming right now think about it, we would sing it like this. Durga lagu punaiti haname vibago Vishtara shankatam iti nameya vibaha konam hivar tulam iti haname vibaga gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamuham gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamuham. Along with 40 other verses. I'm picking this one because it happens to be the Avatut speaking about space. He says, in the self of the Atman, which is all pervasive, imaginings like divisions, dimensions of space disappear. Width, length, depth, height, all are so many angular projections of the creative mind. So forget them. Be pure consciousness, wisdom, bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So the 5 kinds of space are there, and we want to be inner explorers. See? So I would totally disagree with Captain Kirk. See? Space, the final frontier. Inner space is the only frontier. That's the only exploration to make. It's beyond the 5 elements, it's beyond the thinking mind. It's back into the very nature as wisdom. They call it the causal level of things, because wisdom caused all of this. I just said thoughts and words. Remember how many special words were here? Lam, Vam, Ram, Ham. Why do you think they assigned these very beautiful words that all sound like Om? They all end with M. And that cover all bases with different petals, all these different worlds, and that have different deities looking at them and protecting them, you see, and guiding souls through them, keeping other souls out from them, guardians at the gate and so forth. All of this becomes very, sorry to use the word, as a Buddhist or a Vedantist, exciting, you see. All it becomes very exhilarating to think about this as a reality, not just as a fantasy or a dream or something of that nature. This is based in age-old wisdom, ages-old wisdom, you see, as far as India is concerned. And from that Jnana Kasha, the space of intelligence, what have we coursed through then? We've coursed through the space of physical things, Bhutakasha. We've coursed through the space of prana or life force, the Pranakasha. And we saw the different beings there. We took a quick look at them and said, hello, goodbye. And then on the way in, we reached the Chitakasha along the path of the celestials, beyond the path of the ancestors, the path of the celestials. We reached the space of thought, higher thought. And there we saw mind-born sons and sages keeping their subtle bodies to come back to earth, not out of karma to repay, but because of compassion. See, they're keeping their eye, as these deities that look on, they're keeping their eye on these lower worlds because people are waking up, like a mother bird keeps an ear to the egg, her egg. If it scratches inside and the scratching becomes intense, she'll peck on the outside. So think of these chakras and these passageways leading to the chakras as something that you want the Divine Mother to come along and peck at the outer shell of that. These lotuses will then open with the proximity of your own wisdom and your own knowledge. And then you can pass into them and pass on to the highest levels of consciousness. We're describing the process to moksha here, liberation, mukti, kaivalya, freedom from nature. We're talking about nirvana, that everything that vibrates gets completely blown out like a candle, and what's left is just bliss, absolute bliss. Pure consciousness, pure awareness, pure bliss. We just sang it with the Avadut there. It said, invisible, like the sky, like space. Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamaham. So Jnanamritam is that nectar, amritam, of wisdom. Samarasam, it's the highest of all delights. You see, there can be nothing more saturated with bliss than that. And that's why when you go beyond it into the final akasha, what I talked about, Sri Ramakrishna's called it the Mahakasha. Sometimes you call it the Chid Akasha. So that's what it's called here by Lord Vashishta. Paramakasha, you hear that referred to in Vashishta's yoga too. The space of awareness. Well, what happened to worlds, physical things? What happened to energy? What happened to thought? What happened to intelligence? It all went back to its source in pure conscious awareness. And there's where Brahman and Shakti is. I was very happy to see this image had this biggest Russian doll holding a baby. So I said, oh, that's perfect, you see. There's Brahman and Shakti, and everything you want to call it Shiva and Shakti, everything this divine couple will give rise to, if you're looking back on remember when Shiva and Shakti got conjoined, when we looked at the 7 chakras here? It's at the 6th chakra, right? In the 3rd eye. They rested together there. They're the deity that's all seeing. Their union brings together everything that falls after. And they unite completely as one when they reach the Sahasrara. So you can see how all of Indian systems are so interconnected. You just need to study them and stay at the study for a while. Shall we go back and read it? Maybe at the end of the class series, 9 class series we've given on qualification, we will read that to end Swami Vivekananda's great advice and encouragement that we need to look into these systems, refresh ourselves on them, and become aware of everything that we are and everything that lies within us and our essence, all springing from our essence. Well, that's what you get here when you reach the Chitakasha. Lord Vashishta himself here has a quote. He says, all forms, multifarious in manifestation and expression, being aspects of the wisdom word, like drops of rain falling into torrential rivers, enter the infinite ocean of consciousness called Brahman. Each akasha, physical, pranic, mental, intellectual, and causal, dissolve into the Paramakasa, the supreme space of pure conscious awareness. That was said to the young Sri Ram in his teenage years by Lord Vasishtha so many ages ago. So as I was saying earlier, we've fallen away from that. Technology has not advanced us. Quite often it's taking us in the opposite direction of truth. The truth shines within you eternally. That's not subject to ages and passage of time or space, as the Avadhut just sang to us. He says, forget all those dimensions of space and so forth. Know that you're pure consciousness and pure bliss and pure existence. Thou art that. Thou art the Atman. And about Brahman further, Vasishtha says here in the final quote, like Akasha, space that holds many objects yet is not affected by them, so too does Brahman hold both hold and pervade the many worlds in various forms held in space and time, though it is beyond space and time. So like we've mentioned before, poison is in the snake, but the snake doesn't die from it. Would be how Sri Ramakrishna would describe Brahman and all its multifarious, as Vasishtha put it here, multifarious manifestations and expressions that go all the way down to the root chakra, to beings in hell, in the hell realms, that is, in the dream of hell. So from the nether realms all the way up to the highest heavens and beyond, I realize, Jafar sings, I realize that only thou exists, O Lord. There's nothing exists but thee. So then we've done some justice to Vasishtha's system and also talked about Kundalini's chakras at length. Next week we'll look then at Advaita Vedanta and see how we can see the Sutradhara, and see this thread running through all of India's darshanas called non-duality. It's very precious. Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pado Padme Toye Shritva Pranamami Mahur Mahur Pranamami Mahur Mahur Swadharma Shishtitam Sagarvam Shamsatam Jananatristata Toyaiva Bhajaho Swadharmo Vaidiko Hyanargo Darshitaha Vivekananda Te Prabhate Pranjali Narendra Shashave Narendra Yovane Narendra Kridane Narendra Shikshane Narendra Palane Narendra Harpane Vivekananda Te Prabhate Pranjali Vivekananda Te Prabhate Pranjali. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Hari Om